Hi everyone, my name's Shea Stedford and we are here at the ACM. This is the brand new SSL studio at the Guildford campus. This is an amazing space. It's kind of just finished. It's a working studio at the minute. It's a working studio environment, SSL duality desk, and just a great environment to be in. I'm lucky enough today to be here doing a workshop for music production. So a little bit about myself. My name's Shea Stedford. I'm a production tutor here for both diploma and degree. And I specialise mainly in electronic dance music, so electronic music production, whether it being drum and bass, house, garage, anything produced within a DAW. Logic, Maschine, Ableton, and so on. So the point of this workshop is to get tracks done fast and work on your efficiency when producing. So you're not spending 2 or 3 days on the same track or a week on the same track. You're spending maybe half an hour to an hour on an idea that you can get from a simple creative spark or like an idea of a melody down into a full arrangement within a small space of time. We're going to be using 2 separate DAWs. I'm going to be using Maschine as my main DAW to start with to get the ideas down. And then I'm going to be moving over to Logic to arrange those ideas into an arrangement that can be around about that 3 to 4.5, 5 minutes in length, all within that half an hour time frame. This is something that takes practice to do, and it is something that you will need to do on a regular basis in order to get good at it and get to the stage where you feel that you can make maybe 2 or 3 different tracks in a day and be happy with those ideas. But it's also a good practice to know that if you've spent half an hour on a track, you're not really worried if it's not amazing. It's just an idea that you've wasted half an hour on rather than an idea that you've wasted a week on. Please remember, if you've got any questions about anything that I go over in this workshop, write some comments at the bottom of this video and I will answer them in the live Q&A, because after this I will be doing a live Q&A where I will answer your questions. So if you write the comments in, anything to do with the sound choice, why I'm doing what I'm doing, how I'm doing what I'm doing, why I'm using 2 DAWs, it can be anything. As long as it's music related or related to the workshop, I'll answer it. So yeah, get your notepads out and let's go. To start this off, this is electronic music production, but it does get sort of the bad rap for having not a lot of musicality to it. I am not trained in, per se, in sort of music theory. I'm not very big on music theory. But I also believe that it's not essential to know music theory that well for electronic music production. It's good to know it, but it's not an essential thing, as if I was playing guitar or something. So I'm going to try and make this as musical as possible. But first I'm going to talk through the 16 sounds. So how Maschine works, you have a track or a group of tracks, group A, and on group A through to H, so you have 8 groups, then which you can double up to have 16 or 32, as many as you want. But within each group, you have 16 possible sound slots or sound sources. Now, these can be samples of your choosing, these can be loops, these can be synthesizers, these can be pretty much anything that you want to put on them that will emit sound. So I have 16 sounds here, of which I have called my Liquid Volume 2 sound bank, all drum and bass orientated. So I'm going to play you through the sound. So first of all, slot 1, we have a kick drum. Slot 2, rim shot. 3, closed hat. 4, open hat. Then we've got 4 loops. Basic loops. Then we have 4 basses. Very low sub. Growly top bass. Another sub, but this time from a synthesizer, not a sample. And then another growly bass from a synthesizer, not a sample. And then across the top we have our instruments. So I have a piano sound, a string sound, another sort of paddy type string sound, and then just some white noise. Okay, so that takes us through our 16 sounds. Now this whole track is going to be based around just these, and it's manipulating these. So let's just start. I'm going to start with some musicality. So I'm going to start with a piano sound, and I'm going to want to get some form of melody down with this. In Maschine, this makes it very easy for you to do so. So for instance, across the top here, I have a keyboard mode. And within this keyboard mode, you can play the notes of whatever synthesizer or noise that you have chosen within that sound slot. Up across the top here, I can choose whether I want to key range this, so I can have this within a minor key, and then I can choose what note is the root note for that key. So here, for instance, I've chosen E flat and minor. So every note I play will be in the key of E flat minor, which helps me a lot because I'm not very good at music theory. And it also gives me the actual note that I'll be playing, or the chord, if I move on to chords, that I'll be playing. So for instance, for this case, I'm going to go to the chords mode, and I'm going to pick a chord set in minor from my root key, and it will play me the chord, okay? So I'm going to go through and just get this done as quick as possible, pretty much. I know I can't really mess this up because it's always going to be in key. So I'm going to record a pattern, the first pattern, which would be my intro for the start of the track. So I'm going to press pattern 1, which brings me up a whole new pattern to start recording into. And I'm going to turn the pattern size up to 16 bars, okay? So I've got a nice long length of pattern for an intro. I'm going to press record, and then I'm going to record in with a metronome. Can't really go wrong. That'll do. And now you'll hear that it will just loop that round for my first loop. So now I have already some form of musicality going within this. It sounds not that static, it's quite a nice piano sound, but I want to add to this, I want to make it a little bit more thick. So I'm going to make a new pattern. This first pattern I'm going to have as my intro, and then I'm going to move on to the second half of the intro where I'm going to bring in another instrument, maybe strings. So if I go back to my pads, click my string, now I have strings with those chords, which I can add to the background of the sound. So I'm going to stop play, I'm going to click pattern and duplicate my pattern over, and you'll notice within the screen, my first pattern is all just piano. Now my second pattern will now have piano and strings in it, if I record those strings in. So let's record some string parts. Lovely. So now I'm going to pull my mixer up and just balance these two slightly. Bring the strings down a touch. Turn the metronome off. Now in pattern 2, I'm going to go back to my pianos and add in some higher notes in the second pattern. And record that into the second pattern. So as you can see from the screenshot, this is all my piano notes that I've been played in pattern 2. But in pattern 1, I just have the chords. In pattern 2, I have the chords and I have those extra notes across the top. So this is my musicality part. The next stage, I'm going to bring in some hi-hats. So I'm going to duplicate this pattern over, and I'm going to add in some hi-hats to this. So, lovely. I'm going to bring in a closed hat and an open hat. Now, if you can hear, this isn't perfectly on beat, so it's a quick way to get that in time, and that's called quantization. And it's as simple as just holding shift and pressing a button on the machine hardware to get that done in the software. So you click the shift and quantize. Let me make sure that I've got all of the notes selected. Quantize up. Now all of those notes will quantize to 16 bars for me, which is helpful. Lovely. If I right click and make sure the quantize is on, let me just pull this back to the main beat. Lovely. So now I've got some hi-hats and a closed hat. On my open hat, if I go back to my pad mode, within the hardware I'm going to add some reverb to this to give it a bit more atmosphere, a bit more professional sounding rather than just a clean, dry hi-hat. So I'm going to, on the hardware, go to a new slot and then go down to reverb, add that in, put a plate or a hall reverb on that. Lovely. So now it's got a bit more atmosphere around it. So now when I play, I'm going to find those pianos. I'm going to quantize those pianos up. Much nicer. So on the second part, now I've got sort of the beginnings of the intro. Now I want to bring in some bass and bring in, because the idea for this is hopefully to get a vocalist on this afterwards. So we've got a nice build into the initial start of the track, and now we're going to bring in some bass just to get a bit of a growl going. So go and find some basses. Kind of like that growly bass. So I'm going to go to my keys on the keyboard, not in a chord mode, just on the keys. And just have a little play around and see what kind of notes are going to fit well with those piano parts. So let's have a play. Maybe down an octave. So it's kind of around those notes, so we'll start from here. Nice, I'm kind of feeling that. If you get to a stage where you really like the sound of something, just put it down, just record it. You can always change it at a later date. So let's go in and record. Lovely. On this sound now, I'm going to go back to the original sound and go and manipulate that bass a little bit with some filtering. So turn a filter on and a bit of drive. Now listening to that, I kind of like that movement of that bass. It gives it a bit more flavour and a bit more vibe. I hate the word vibe, but a bit more vibe to the sound. So I'm just going to put it into automation, hold the automation button, and just tweak that cut-off opening and closing to give it a little bit more movement and flex. So let's record that in. And you can see that recording in just at the bottom of the screen on the screen grab. And now that will follow that opening and closing of that filter, so it's nice and moving. It has a bit more sort of freedom to it and a bit more movement around it. So this is really where I want to take the start of this track in the first three parts. The next stage is to maybe go into a smaller breakdown, which is just piano, and then into a full drop. And the only thing I really need extra in this for the drop is the main drums, right? So for parts 1, 2, and 3, I'm going to, in scene 1, because Maschine works around scenes, in scene 1, I'm going to choose pattern 1. In scene 2, I'm going to choose pattern 2, and in scene 3, I'm going to choose pattern 3. Kind of makes sense, right? But all of these I'm going to append to a track, append to my song. So when I change in the song mode, you can see now this will play back from start to finish. Pattern 1, pure piano. Pattern 2, piano with some strings and higher notes in those pianos, the single notes for the melody. And then pattern 3 would have the bass in. So let's have a listen. And while this is playing through, I'm just going to audition some drum sounds. Kind of like this one for this kind of track. So right, on this part, I think I'm going to record this in. Kind of would have helped if I did it on time, to be honest. So we'll start that again. I'll move that to the start. If you make mistakes in things, don't worry. Don't let it halt your production or your creativity. Just stop and go back to the start again. It's not a big deal if you don't do it first time, especially if you're not a robot you've got a heartbeat, you're a person, you're not going to get everything first off every time. So from this loop 3, I'm going to bring in my drums. Keep rolling. Nice. So out of all of these, I'm going to move all of my drums up. Let's move these around, make sure they're quantized in time. Everything looks on beat to me. And then with this, I'm going to go back to my filter, and I'm going to filter these drums in from the start. So they start like nothing, and then they filter themselves up. So this is going to build into my drop. Ready? So we'll start. You can hear it slowly, gradually building in. So I'm going to record that in. So that's recorded. I can hear here there was a slight mistake in timing. Let me change my quantized value to a lower value, so it's going to be more precise. So now I've got a nice smooth intro into my drums coming in. I'm then going to move scene 1, drag and drop across to end up being the breakdown. And then lastly, I'm going to have a brand new scene here where I'm going to put a pattern in. And I'm going to call this pattern 5, 16 bars. And then, no, actually, no, I'm going to drag in scene 3 and drag scene 3 across into here. Let's have a listen. Lovely. So I now have scene 6, of which I'm going to get rid of those drum parts and put all of my drum parts in. So I'm going to play all the extended loops over the top for the drop. Lovely, quantize those up. Maybe add in some of my own kicks. Might add those in over the top. one ties it all up again. So now I have considered a drop, right? The only thing I'm missing from my drop is a really low subline now. So I'm going to add in this subline. However, I've already got the notes from my growl. So I can grab these notes, copy them from the growl, save me having to record them again. Copy them down, follow the subline, put my cursor to the start, at the start of the loop, and paste those notes in. So now when I play back, let's have a listen to this soloed and this soloed. So now I've got bass and top growl on top for the drop part. So this isn't on the intro, this is just on the drop. Let's watch our volume slightly. As I can see, I'm going red a touch. Sweet. That's pretty much the whole track, to be honest, just to start with the bare bones. So we've got an intro, we've got a build, we've got a drop, and we've got kind of like a breakdown. Now from just these 4 or 5 sections, you can now take all of these files as the idea of the track into Logic or into a different DAW, and then form a basic structure of a song. And then from there, add bits in, take bits out, start to mix stuff. You can see I've done no real mixing here. I've done no real level balances or anything like that, or added a lot of effects and things, just stuff to get me in the mood and in the vibe. So a little bit of automation in terms of filtering, a little bit of reverb just to get it going, and just to get myself in a position where I feel like I want to work on this. I'm not sure how long this has been so far, but this is normally around how long I would spend on a quick idea for something. I'll then take these files, export them out, and then open them in Logic as a whole new project. So what I'm going to do now is export all of these files out so they're no longer in Maschine, and I have them as audio files which I can drag into another DAW. In my case, this time it's going to be Logic, and just carry on working on them. So in order to do that, I'm going to come up to File in the Maschine browser window. I'm going to move down to Export Audio, and here it will bring up a little window that will tell you or ask you what you would like to do. So it will ask you a range. I've picked loop because I can see the size of my loop is from start to finish. I'm going to pick, instead of master output, because that would just give me one audio file of the whole thing, or group outputs, because I only have one group, that would still give me the whole track. I'm going to pick sound outputs. And now I can drop down to see this is my group. These are all the sounds that are in there. I don't have to have all of these ticked because there may not be anything on those sounds. I may not have used all of those sounds. But for this case, just to be on the safe side, I'd prefer to have audio files with nothing in that I can delete than audio files that I don't have that I should have bounced when I had the chance. So I'm going to keep everything in that group selected. So yes, I want all of those. I'm going to put these to the desktop, into the desktop, and I'm going to call this D and B workshop, and export. It will do the exporting for me, and then the next step is to open Logic and drag the files in. So right now we've got Logic open. It's my Logic view. Inside Logic, I'm not really going to have to use this anymore in Maschine mode. However, I can put this into MIDI mode, now Maschine. So this is no longer controlling Maschine. I can now use this to control any software that I like. This would work as a standard MIDI controller with CC controls for plugins or just notes that I can play. So I'm going to leave this in MIDI mode now, Maschine, just as a controller for Logic, basically. So within Logic now, I'm going to drag those files in that we got from Maschine. So come to my little media browser section in Logic. Locate to the desktop, I can see D&B Workshop, the folder that I saved it as, and here's all of my files, okay? Now you can see there's a lot of these, but nothing actually happens until the very end. This means that I've bounced it correctly and I've got the full stemmed version of the track. So I know that I'm in the right place, which is always helpful. The first thing to do in Logic is to make sure that you are at the right beats per minute, the right BPM for the stems you're going to provide, okay? There is new versions of, in the newer version of Logic, that gives you the option to drag files in that will convert or adhere to the session's tempo. But just to be on the safe side, And just as good practice, make sure that your session, before you drag any files in or add any reverbs or delays or anything like that, or any time-based processes, that your BPM is correct, especially when recording things. So I've got 174 BPM. I'm going to drag all of these files over to Logic. It's going to ask me, do I want new tracks, create existing tracks? I'm going to create new tracks. I don't want to place them all on one track. That would be pointless. Click OK. Now this will give me a spread of my whole production in Maschine across audio files in Logic, and named what they were in Maschine. So if I go through, I can first of all have a look and see what ones are doing nothing. So I can see this one has nothing in it, simple as deleting it. Again, this one has nothing in it, this one has nothing in it. If it doesn't have anything, it has no place being in the session. It might as well be gone. But everything else here is being used at some stage or another. So let's have a listen through. So I've got piano. I can see my strings come in here. Nice. And I know that I'm working to 16 bars because all of my patterns were 16s. So what I'm going to do is use a tool, my secondary tool in Logic, to cut sections. This is just for structure. So I know there's a section here, there's a section here where it changes up, another section, breakdown, undo that one, that was a bit dodgy there, and then drop. So I have intro section, I have build section, I've got another sort of build where some bass and stuff comes in. I've then got breakdown, which is pure piano, and then I've got pure drop. So having something that's maybe 81 or so bars long, which is 1:50 so far, I can easily create a very quick idea of arrangement just using this. So for instance, let me get this done. Before I add anything else, let's get the structure of this done. So it's around about 3.5 to 4 minutes long. So I know I'm not going to want just 16 for a drop. I may want double that for the drop because I may want to add something else in on the second 16. So I'm going to duplicate these over. So now I've got double drop. After this, I'll probably want to go to some form of verse, for instance. So I'm going to duplicate these over, except in this one, I'm not going to have my piano. I'm going to take the piano out for the verse, for instance. And then I may bring the piano back in for the second half. I probably don't want that growly bass in for the verse. I probably just want that for the drop. So we'll find our top growl and get rid of that for the verse. The more and more you do this is the more and more you'll get used to doing this, but it gives you a good idea of how to visualize the start of a track. A good thing as well to get a good visual for how things build through a track in terms of clips is to get rid of anything that's not doing anything. So for instance, this has nothing going on here. None of these have anything because at the start it's just piano. So let's get rid of everything that's doing nothing. All of these files have nothing in them. Get rid of that because this is my breakdown. So again, in the breakdown, I've only got piano. So now you can start to see you're getting a structure going. I can see intro, intro build. This is where it builds up with the basses in. This is my breakdown. Here is my drop of where I can, what's in this one here? Sub low, top growl. So there's nothing in this subsection here. Let's get rid of that. I can move this along. I can now have a look at these parts. So get rid of that, not needed. In my verses here, let's have a listen. Not bad. So this is, you can see this is coming out of the main drop. I've got like an idea of what's going on. I may then take the drums out for the second. And the whole time, all you're really doing is trying to give yourself an idea of where you're going to move from. And like, once you do this, you can sort of figure out what you're going to add in afterwards. Remember, if you've got any questions whatsoever about what I'm going through, write the comments in, write your questions in the comments and I will get back to them as and when. But yeah, anything to do with the structure of what I've been doing, the sound choice, sound creation, why I'm using Maschine, why I'm using Logic. But yeah, any questions about anything, just make sure you write in the comments and I'll answer them when we get to the Q&A. So I know now that I've got verse into maybe another breakdown. I'm going to go drop again and move the drop over. And then I'm going to go to an outro. So my outro, I may just want drums. Let's move this up. and I may just want slight bass with just piano. And then for the last part of the outro, I'm going to want just drums and piano. So get rid of the bass. And then for the last leaving of the track, I'm just going to have pure piano. So let's move this section across, see if it will let me do it. Nope. I need to make my view wider and larger. There we go. So now this is my full arrangement, of which I can change at any date, but it's just a skeleton. This is one of the hardest things and one of the most common questions I get asked a lot in tutorials, ACM, in lessons when we're going through building tracks, is how to get an idea of maybe 16 bars and convert it into something that's a full 4.5–4 minute track, when really all you need is the drop in order to do that. Now you can see that I've created what goes up to 4 minutes 45 worth of music and basic arrangement, basic skeleton, drums, bass and melody from start to finish that has movement to it. I've got builds that drop, and then I've got a slight come down into the verses, another breakdown, and then drop again, okay? So from this section, we're going to listen through to the track so far and see where we're at and start to think about how we're going to mix this and what we're going to add in. Think about effects. And I don't mean reverbs and delays, I mean sound effects, whooshes, crashes, and so on. So let's listen from start to finish. So that's pretty much the workshop done. The whole point of this workshop really was to show how to get something down very fast, within half an hour or so, from initial idea for something, 16 sounds, and then create a full arrangement of around about a contemporary time for electronic dance music. That's sort of 4 to 5 minutes. Not radio edits, sort of full tracks that could be edited down. But the way we've done it so far is it's very easy to edit down because we're working in 16 bar sections, which we can move around and manipulate, make 32s into 16s and so on to get that radio edit size. But the next stage for after this would be, once we've got our basic structure, is to add things around it. So for instance, as you heard just before, when it moves from section to section, there's perfect ideas where you've got now an idea or a visual or like a representation of what you think would go well there. Like things would happen while you're listening to it that you would expect to come in. So for instance, at the end of the build-up, where it just drops back to piano for the breakdown, this is a perfect spot for booms and crashes and whooshes. Excellent for the vocal to become a bit more powerful. The whole idea again was to maybe get a vocalist on this. With the vocalist on this kind of structure, this basic structure, is very easy for a vocalist to work with, rather than sending a vocalist something that is fully done with full melodies everywhere and crashes and stuff. This is just a nice kind of canvas, just a plain, borderline, basic skeleton of a track. Right, so let's round this up. Let's look at where we started from to where we got to and how we kind of got there. So to start off with, we were in Maschine, using the Maschine hardware and the Maschine software, obviously, but trying to use the hardware as much as possible. We started with a very basic one group, 16 sound sort of configuration, which is a good idea to kind of pre-make your groups to know that you've got time to then just be creative and not have to worry about sound choice. We then made a very basic arrangement in terms of how we wanted to start the track, keeping it fairly musical, so adding some chords, using the chord generator, and sort of understanding that theory isn't essential to know to go in to make these chords, as this helps you to learn theory as you're doing it. So we got some chords down for piano, then we built into some strings, put some basic drums and bass down, and then created kind of a up to drop section. From that, we moved over to Logic, where we brought our stems that we had bounced out from our quick idea into Logic as just 16 bar sections, and then we moved those 16 bar sections around to create a basic arrangement. Working in a way like this with basic sections of 16 bars and so on makes it very easy to move sections across and make it very easy to gain a better workable for the club, for radio, for mixing arrangement. So as we have so far, we've got drums, we've got bass, we've got melody, and we've got a very good structure to start with. Now the fact that we've only spent 30 minutes really on this rather than a whole day of tweaking sounds and tweaking kicks and snares and things, because this is just an idea, I've not spent that long on it. I've spent 30 minutes on it. So it's not the end of the world if this doesn't amount to being my next release. It's just an idea that I've put down that I can come back to at a later date that may spark some interest again. This is a really good thing to get in the habit of doing because you don't need all day to do it. You can have a small, modest setup. You don't need to have the Maschine hardware to run the software, but it's good to have the hardware in front of you. But it just gives you an idea that you can just make something very quickly and not have to worry about it being, I've spent 2 days solid on this, this has to be the next release, this has to be amazing. It can just be an idea that if you want to, you could throw away really at the end of the day, but don't ever throw anything away, like keep it on a hard drive, but just have it there in the background. That's kind of how I work most of the tracks when I'm making tracks. I make maybe 4 or 5 ideas in a day, all half an hour or so, and then so at this stage I'd move on from now and then go on to a completely different track, change the key, maybe change the genre of music just to get out of drum and bass for a bit, maybe make some house, maybe make some garage, make a few different ideas and then come back to these at a later date, which keeps things fresh and it keeps things vibey. It keeps me interested in what I want to do. It makes me want to wake up and make music rather than I'm stuck in the same tune for 3 weeks and I don't know what to do and I hate music and I'm going to give up. Because we don't want to do that. I want to do what I want to do for the rest of my life, not what I have to do for the rest of my life. So if I can get paid and have fun, that's kind of the goal, I'd say. Remember, any questions, write them in the comments and I will get back to you in the live Q&A with any of the questions that you have regarding things like the arrangement, things like sound choice, why I'm using 2 separate DAWs to do this, which I think is another very important thing, which is a whole other conversation. But yeah, any questions, I'm more than happy to answer. If you've enjoyed what you've seen today, or this has interested you in the slightest of ways, and you'd like to meet me in person or talk to me in person about production, or you're interested in studying here, make sure you sign up to come to the next open day because I'll definitely be there. So you can come and talk to me. Go to acm.ac.uk, so www.acm.ac.uk, sign up for the next open day, and then I'll probably have my Maschine with me. And I'll probably have a project open that I'll be making on the spot there and then. So come down with your questions and yeah, can't wait to see you. See you later. Hello everyone, it's Shea here. I hope you enjoyed that video. This is the live Q&A part, so I'm going to be answering your questions. If you've got any questions and you haven't put them in the comments yet, go to the chat, put the questions in, and I will answer them as they come up. So a bit about myself again. I spoke a little bit at the start of the last video. My name's Shea Stedford. I'm an electronic music production producer, and I teach music production here at the ACM. And I'm going to be answering your questions pretty much from the video. So let's get straight into it. Questions from YouTube. So we have Oliver Susat first. Yet? All good? Sweet. Right, let's start again. First question, Oliver Susat. We have, if you want to make this kind of music, what equipment do you need to get started? Really, just a digital audio workstation, so a DAW, and what you do within that is up to you. I mean, you can make music nowadays without a DAW. You can have drum machines, synthesizers, all live jam, where you just record a live jam and have some form of hard disk recorder to do that. But this style of music or this style of production, a DAW, Logic, Maschine, Pro Tools, FL Studio, Ableton, anything that you can sequence in that will contain MIDI, let you edit audio, it's really up to you. I mean, equipment-wise, hard like things that you can touch, I'd say a really good one to have is some form of controller. So something that gives you a bit more hands-on feel with your music production instead of just clicking with a mouse a lot of the time. So maybe a MIDI controller, something with some knobs and some sliders on it. But just to make music, a DAW is pretty much all you're going to need. Second question, John Gallen, what's up John? Is there enough 300 hertz? So it's like the devil's frequency. 300 hertz is not a good frequency. 300 hertz is like the boxy, like nasally, it's not good. So is there enough? There's too much. There's always too much 300 hertz. It's Lil Tracks. Which expansion pack for Maschine would you recommend most for creating hip-hop tracks? Also, can you use Maschine as a DAW at ACM, or will we always use Logic, for example? First of all, expansion packs, there's loads for hip-hop for Maschine. You've got ones called True School, I think Golden Era is another one, or Golden Legend, something like that. But really, it's not, you don't have to get a hip-hop sample pack or expansion pack to make hip-hop. You can use any sounds. I often use house samples for drum and bass tracks. I often use drum and bass samples for house tracks. So it's really, it's up to you what you use. A good thing to do as well is just to record your own sounds. So get yourself a very cheap recorder, even your phone, and record mono samples of random things that you can then process. Because the creativity when doing that is so much more vast, and you're open to a lot more possibility in terms of what can I do with this sound, rather than flicking through expansion pack sounds. But have a look at some of the expansions, like True School is a very good one. I think there's one called Queensbridge Avenue or something like that, Queensbridge. But there's quite a few hip-hop Maschine expansions. I would say though, don't just look at the hip-hop ones, look at drum and bass ones, look at house ones, look at the one-shots, look at the loops that come with them. I know Native Instruments now do something called sounds.com, where you can sort of drag and drop your favourite sounds from your favourite expansions, which might be a good thing to go by. In terms of using it as a DAW, I teach this at ACM as its own DAW, not just as a plugin within Logic or within Ableton. So we do a module of Maschine, which is Maschine as a DAW in its own right. So from what we started in the video just before, getting an idea down, but then mixing within it, mastering within it, performing within it, DJing with it, it's a very, very good software and a very comprehensive software. So yeah, it's not just Logic that's here and like Ableton, it's pretty much any DAW that's around and is wanted or needed, you will get taught. Another question, Carmen Windsor. What are the most common mistakes novice producers make in drum and bass productions? That's a good question. I mean, there's a lot of mistakes that a lot of people make, but someone else's mistake is what makes the next person's track really good. I don't really think there's many mistakes in music production. I think the only mistake you can really make in drum and bass is having the tempo wrong, or using the sounds wrong, or calling it a genre that it's not, a subgenre that it's not. But I mean, some of the big mistakes that there are is not enough bass. When I first started making drum and bass, I made drum and bass tracks and I thought they sounded amazing, but the bass was just non-existent. There was not enough sub end or low end. And I only really heard that when I started playing them out in clubs, and my track would come in from the one previous, and it was just loose and not very deep. Another one is adding very high frequencies. So it's adding the low sublines, but as well as adding the higher frequencies. So like tizzy, tss, white noise sort of sounds. They really help to create a lot of atmosphere around tracks. You hear it a lot in sub-focus tracks, Wilkinson tracks, any sort of mainstream drum and bass, you will hear a big sizzle on the top. A lot of it either comes from white noise or cymbals, just adding like crushed cymbals over the top of things. So in terms of like mistakes for novices, it's generally adding loads of bass and getting the right bass content, and also getting that excitement around the sounds. There's a lot we could go into in terms of mistakes, but like I said before, someone else's mistake is what makes someone else's track really good. So it's only a mistake if you feel personally that it doesn't work for the track. Luke Cook, another question. What's up, Luke? How do you go about organising your sample libraries? I.e., I have 250 snare drum samples. How do I not waste the next 2 hours going through them? Honestly, you're going to have to waste at least 2 hours going through them so you can organise them, really. A good way to organise your 250 snare samples is to go either by content, frequency content, high snares, low snares, or a good way of doing it is to get a sampler instrument, something like an EXS sampler from Logic, or any sampler really, and just have all of the samples that you have, as many as you can, spread over all notes within per key basically on the keyboard. So you can have all of your samples as a library and then just play through them and audition them as the track's going through. I found that's quite helpful. A lot of the time, I will just grab 4 or 5 snares at complete random and drag them in and layer them and then try and work with them for about 5 minutes. If it doesn't work within 5 minutes, I sack those off and I bring a new 3, 4, 5 in. Organising sample libraries, not just for snares and things, is very important. Prep work, in terms of music production, is 90% of your efficiency. You can't be efficient and produce something if you haven't done the prep work beforehand. If you're not organised, you're just going to sit there, like you say, flicking 2 hours through snares. So maybe think of having a day where you don't make any sounds or any music, you just go through your sample libraries and have subcategories. So you could have a drum and bass folder. Within that you have loops. Within that loops folder you then have 174 for drum and bass BPM. You have loops that are 125. Think of putting things in key. There's some very good software like Mixed in Key is excellent for that. And it will categorize all of your tracks in key order, which helps quite a lot because then it will just whittle down what's going to work and what won't. It takes time and it's not something that you're going to have, you're not going to be able to get out of organising your sample library. I would say put a day a week aside or a couple of hours a week aside just to reorganise. You may think yours at the minute is very good, but you can always make it a little bit better and prep it better. If you know you've got a drum and bass track that's coming up or you've got commission to make some music, a couple of days before, go through a few sounds and have a listen to a few sounds that you think are going to help you. So you've got those sort of creative spark things going on as you start. We've got another question here. From Yulia. Hey Yulia. Hi Shea, what is your favourite plugin when mixing? Right now, I don't really have a favourite. There's a few that I really like. I'm loving the new SSL native plugins, which I've done a few videos on those myself where I rate them quite a lot. Very good sounding plugins. I love the Slate digital plugins, the Slate everything bundle, which is like a rack of plugins where you've got like plugins with like EQs, saturators, compressors, where you can put what you want and where. If I'm completely honest, I think the best plugins to use are the plugins that come with your DAW. Now, a lot of people aren't going to agree and are probably going to slate me for saying it, but if you can get a very good mix, or should I say you can get a very good mix using all stock Logic or Ableton plugins. If you don't know how to use the plugins that come with the DAW, I don't really see why you should go and spend loads of money on third-party plugins. If you can understand how to work the ones in the DAW, you don't need to go elsewhere unless you're looking for a specific tone. But things like Logic and Ableton especially, and Pro Tools, the stock sounds, the stock plugins that come with them and the stock processors are very, very good and are very versatile and usable. A stock plugin that's my favourite is the Logic's Overdrive plugin. A little tip, open the Overdrive plugin, put it on anything, it doesn't matter what you put it on, full tone, 0 drive. Little tip there, full tone, 0 drive on the Overdrive plugin. Works on buses, works on individual tracks, and all it does really is add third order harmonics to whatever you put it on, which is going to make it sound better. That's just how it is. It's a great plugin. So try that, Yulia, if you want to. Another one by Lil Tracks. We've got quite a few questions coming through, this is good. Shea, what piano sounds do you recommend on Maschine? And what sound did you use for this track? Download it now. There's a plugin called Labs by Spitfire Audio, and it's completely free. And it's not like a non-legit free, it's a legitimate free plugin by a company called Spitfire Audio. If you don't know them, they make a lot of the sample libraries for film score people. Amazing sample library company, Spitfire Audio they're called. And they've got a new plugin called Labs, L-A-B-S. In it you get a free piano and you get a few strings now. You've got like a string ensemble, some cellos I believe they've just added to it. But the pianos in that, it's free and it sounds like a very nice open piano. And that's the piano sample that I used in the track just before. So it's not a sample, that's actually a plugin that's playing those samples. Comes very simple. You get a reverb knob where you turn more reverb and a dynamics fader, and that's it. But the actual samples themselves are very good. So what else was in that question? What sound did you use for the track? Yeah, so I wouldn't necessarily go for a piano sample. I would go for maybe a sampled instrument, which is a multi-sampled instrument, something in Contact or that Labs free plugin to use from. The Contact free library, the actual, when you buy Contact, you get like a factory library with it. The pianos in that aren't actually that bad. You've got some very good pianos in there. One's called the Gentleman, the Maverick, Unicorda, I believe one's called Unicorda. That's a very good piano. The Giant is another one. There's so many pianos out there. I'm just loving Labs at the minute because it's free and it's very easy to use, and it sounds good. One of the only plugins that when you play a chord, it spreads the notes slightly off from each other a bit, so it gives like that random instead of like MIDI, you've hit notes. So yeah, try that one, mate. That's really good. DJ Axis, great name. Random stuff in regards to EQing the separate layers. Would you recommend EQing in key? For example, when using a high pass on the piano, putting the cutoff frequency of the pass at the root note. Personally, no. I mean, a lot of people may swear by it and think that you like high passes. In terms of filters, I would put a filter on and get to the point where I've gone too far and then just pull it back slightly. In terms of EQing on bells and sort of tight cues to make something tuned or tune it to the type of the track, I do that quite a lot, especially with percussive elements, things like rim shots, hi-hats, snares. In Maschine, I just do that by tuning the sound, by turning up and down the pitch of the sound. But if I've just got a like audio clip, an audio sample that I've dragged into a DAW, I will find the dominant frequency or the main note frequency from the key of my track and just lift that slightly. But in terms of filters, I rarely cut off at a good area because you're always going to have a harmonic around that's going to be maybe quite nice. Bell curves and sort of tighter cues, tune on as much as you want really. It's very easy to lose a lot of time doing stuff like that though. A good way to do it, if we go back to the question from Luke earlier about the sample library thing, is to find or like know the samples that you've got and know that for this style of track, sample 15 in subgroup 4 or whatever is going to sound good in it. But yeah, tight cues and things like that, tune away all day. But things like high passes, I would just pass it or like just do it until you get to the point where you think you've gone too far and then just slightly back. So things like vocals, for instance, cutting in on a vocal up to around about 200, maybe too far, but then you can just slightly come back a little bit until it sounds like it's in the track and not on the track. Another question, Eddie Ed, any chance of a drum bus? Yes, I would always use a drum bus. In the video before that you just watched, there wasn't time. All I was doing was getting an arrangement down, so I wasn't thinking of mixing at all. But yes, always, all of my drums would feed a bus, called a bus, not a bus. The next question is, what's a drum bus? So a drum bus, you'd have all of your tracks, would feed one channel called the drum bus, an auxiliary channel, which you can put your own plugins and have an overall level for. So I could have all of my individual drum tracks sent to an output that has the sound from all of those tracks, and then EQ the drums as a whole, compress the drums as a whole, saturate, and so on. I would always do that, but that would be more in my mixing stage. I probably wouldn't do that in my creative stage because I used to do that a lot, but then I would end up mixing my track and spending a lot more time mixing it than I was creating sounds and creating ideas for something. It's a hard thing to get your head around at first because you always want to make it sound as good as possible. But if your creative side is down, it's going to sound okay to start with, sort of thing. That's what a drum bus is, and any chance of one, always, always. Even if it's just feeding and there's nothing on it, having it there just in case is a thumbs up for that. Another one from Axis, random stuff. A random stuff bus is what? Is a layer which you route different layers to in order to affect those layers as a whole. Yes, yep. So yeah, the bus is just like the, are you answering the question there? I think you may be answering someone else's question. That could, yeah. What I said, basically, you send things, you send elements to a track, and in that track, you then put plugins and that on. That makes sense, doesn't it? Sam Eid. Hi, Sam. Where do you usually get your drum sounds from? Wait, well, I'm lost it. There we go. Where do you usually get your drum sounds from, or your drum samples from? I get very stuck with drums and making them fit in the mix. Do you have any advice? Drum samples is a never-ending journey, rabbit hole of like, you can never have too many drum samples. The problem with that is when you have too many drum samples, you rarely get the drum sound that you want because you've got too much of a selection. A lot of my drum samples come from sample packs from Loop Masters, one-shot samples. The majority, if I'm completely honest, come from sampling other people's music and sampling drum breaks, finding a break in a track and chopping out that break and then chopping out the individual slices of the elements within that loop. So I cut out the kick, the hi-hat, the snare, the clap, and so on. It's not stealing. It is kind of stealing, but it's not like I'm taking their whole loop. I would work on those from there, but I know that if I like the sound of that track and I like the drum sound, just take it and use it. As long as you do something with it, it's all right, I suppose. I mean, I don't want to get anyone in trouble, but it's like a lot of people do that. That's how the whole sampling thing came around. Like a lot of hip hop producers and like massive hip hop producers, Jay Dilla, for instance, was all sampled beats where you would take bits from other people, records, and chop them. And it's kind of how I started making music, just nicking other people's stuff and chopping it up and then just making it my own afterwards. But if you're looking at actual sample packs, have a look at Loop Masters. It's very good because they do a whole host of genre-specific sample packs. But look at some sample packs that aren't the style you're looking to make, if that makes sense. So if you're making hip-hop, look at some drum and bass sample packs. If you're making drum and bass, look at some hip-hop sample packs. So you're not using the same samples as everyone else that's making the style you're making. Which is why I said earlier, a lot of the time for house music, I use drum and bass one-shot samples. Or for drum and bass, I use house samples or garage samples, for instance. And then you kind of know that you've got more of a chance of sounding more original in your style than you do using a sample pack that everyone has, for instance. Another question. A Windows laptop, what do you think would be a good uni laptop for music production? If I'm honest, a MacBook, I know they're well expensive and people don't like Mac and stuff, but a MacBook is not essential, but will be perfect for your work. You don't need a computer to study here. Every single person that does the production course will be assigned a workstation where you have a Mac, you have all the software you're going to need, you have all of the controllers, Ableton pushes, keyboard controllers, a machine to yourself. You have a workstation. However, once you've done your work for the day, you can save it to Google Drive, take home with you. But if you have your own laptop with you, you can run everything from your own laptop. I would say a 13-inch MacBook is fine for now. Spring to the 15 if you want to, but we're not all made of money. Windows ones are very good, obviously because they're cheaper. The only problem you'll find with that is that you won't be able to run software like Logic on it because Logic is Mac only. I would advise for a MacBook because all software production music-wise you'll be able to have on a Mac, not all on a Windows. So yeah, if you can afford to get the Mac, I would do that if I'm honest because it's a great help. I used to study here before I taught here. Years ago I studied here and I didn't have a laptop when I was here. I did everything on the ACM computers, which worked out fine. It just meant that I had to take those files home with me to my desktop computer to work on. And it would have been great to have my own laptop, really, to work on. And what I was doing in lesson, I could take home and carry on straight away from. So look for a MacBook if you can. Refurbished, second-hand, 2011 ones are really good, 2011, 2012, because you can doctor those and take the backs off. Before I got this one, which I didn't want to get, but I kind of had to, I had a 2011 one where I took the CD drive out, I replaced the RAM, I replaced the hard drives. You lose your warranty, but you end up having a very powerful MacBook on a small footprint, which is cheaper than doing it through the App Store. No offense to Apple. So, another question. George Hart, best free plugin, Labs, the piano one. The best free plugin, Labs. Or the stock ones that come with your DAW. The Overdrive plugin from Logic, brilliant. But free plugins, I'd say Labs is very good. Some other free ones. They vary because sometimes they're free and sometimes they're not. Companies like Softtube and companies like Sound Toys, they'll often put out like a plugin free for a week and then you get that plugin for a week for free, but then after that week's up it's about 50 quid. So there's a few that I got for free that aren't free anymore, like the Black Hole Reverb from Eventide. That was free when I first got it. Now it's about 100 quid or something like that. Instead of free, you definitely could spring for £1. Look on places like Plugin Boutique because they do, and VST Buzz and websites like that, where they do a plugin for £1. I recently got the Vacuum synthesizer, Vacuum Pro synthesizer, which since I bought it has featured in pretty much every track that I've put down for things like respaces and stuff. It was £1, and it's normally about 200 quid. So if you can spring for £1, it's like free, pretty much. It's not that much. If you've got a PayPal account, I'm sure you can spare £1. But they're pretty good. Free Labs, the piano one and the string one. Amazing plugin for very authentic professional sounds. Another one from George. What can I do if I can't think of any ideas? I was going to be funny and say give up, but don't. If you don't have any ideas, you need to go away somewhere, watch a film. A lot of the time what I used to do is go out with my phone and just record my journey, or go out for a walk and record what I was doing, or put a movie on and not really think about, I need to make something now. The worst killer for creativity is urgency. Like, I need to do this now. Why can't I make music? Because then you just second guess yourself and you end up with a blank screen of nothing. So I used to get my phone out, or a small handheld recorder, like a Tascam, I believe. I think it's like H Handy or something like that, Handy One. And you just walk around and record your journey. What you're listening to when you're walking about, you like zone in on the things that you're looking at when you're in the environment. And you don't hear things like wind. You don't hear things like passing conversations. But when you record them and then you listen back to the recording, there's all this extra stuff that you didn't hear when you were there at the time. And that has given me some very good starting points for things. And it's normally not just the sounds that I'd use, it's the mood that I get from that recording and the mood that's created, which would then spark maybe a melody idea or the genre that I want to go down, a drum sound, chopping a little section out from that recording and just having that as the start catalyst point for something. So yeah, what do I do if I don't have any ideas? Try to force them in the most unforced way possible by just being creative in other ways, recording your journey, looking at films, playing some Xbox, something like that, just taking your mind off it, and then it will come naturally to you. Another one by Lil Trax. Check all these questions out, this is good. Sorry for another question, you're all right mate, don't worry about it. But would you say that YouTube is a good platform for sharing music, or would you recommend SoundCloud or anything else? I'm going to be completely honest, SoundCloud is very good, it is very good. The only problem with it is like saturated. Trying to get noticed on SoundCloud nowadays is just an uphill battle, really. You are a needle in a massive haystack in terms of SoundCloud, and you kind of need a following to get a bigger following with stuff like that. Any platform is better than the tracks sitting on your hard drive. YouTube's very good, handing your tracks over to bigger YouTube channels. So for like drum and bass, you've got UKF, Liquid City, and for house you've got like Eaton Mess, Subsoul. There's loads of channels that you can pass your tracks onto. What I would say, if I'm completely honest, if you want to be taken a bit more seriously and look more professional in what you're doing and like career-wise for music production, is go to places like DistroKid. £20 a year it costs, right? And it's a subscription where you can upload as many tracks as you want, and it will host them on Tidal, Spotify, Deezer, all Apple Music, all of the streaming sites that people listen to music on. You will generate revenue a lot more than you would on YouTube, for instance, if you were monetizing your videos. But it just makes it look a little bit more professional than just having a SoundCloud account. I'm not knocking SoundCloud. SoundCloud's fine. If you have one and you're doing well on it, fine. If you have one and you're trying to boost your profile on it, that's perfect. But in terms of actually getting music out there and maybe creating some revenue from your music, or looking a bit more serious about what you're doing, is to put a little bit of money into it. So just like subscribe to DistroKid. It's what I use at the minute to put all of my own individual material out, my own artist material out. And you can upload what you want, when you want, pretty much. So yeah, I think that's kind of the best platform really to go on. YouTube's good, it's not too bad. A good thing to do on YouTube is to go to other vloggers and go to other YouTube creators with your music and say to them, would you like to use my music? For people that have maybe more subscribers than you do. And then you can get your music heard and credited and then see where that leads on from there. Another question, Axis, all right. Any tips for sound design? Record everything that you ever do. Have your phone on. I'm not recording this, I should be recording it. Have your phone on the side and record anything that you do. If you're walking from the train station to uni, if you're walking from your house to the shop, if you're just standing there and people are walking past the window, record it and just take stuff from that. Don't be afraid to make something sound horrible, and don't think that you have to sound like someone else. When you're designing sound, the best sounds are the most original sounds. And the most original sounds come from original sources. So instead of using like ready-made packs and layering things up to create a new sound, start from nothing. A lot of the time I use vocal samples, or I used to record my own lectures, not to listen to myself talking, but to like take the start word that I said of a lecture, chop that word out, and then use that as a bass line, sample it, and then make a bass line out of it, or make a lead synth out of it. Because the actual sound itself has got so much timbre and character to it, because it's a voice with like vocal cords and stuff. You have something that's original to you. So record stuff is my big tip on sound design. Record anything, and it doesn't matter how bad the recording is. You don't need a £5,000 handheld like recorder that you see on like BBC One, David Attenborough recording people. You need an iPhone. That's all you're going to need. Something that you can then further process. I used to like the fact that my iPhone was such bad quality, like the iPhone 4, I think it was years ago. Terrible quality recordings, but that terrible quality translated into thickness and texture and sort of saturated sound once I started to manipulate. Another one, Ollie Dal Bennett. Would you know about how to get gross beat on Logic? I'm not sure what that means. Gross beat. Would you know about how to get gross beat? I'll have to come back to that one. I don't know. If you could, and you're still here, explain what gross beat is. I may be being completely stupid here, and I should know what this is. I'll circle back to that one. But yeah, write in the comments and just say like what you're talking about. Lil Tracks, again, talking about laptops. Do we bring our laptop to college to use, did you say, or do we use ACM's computers? Use both. Use ACM's computers for the demonstrations. Anything that I'll do in a lesson where I'll be demonstrating, I will 9 times out of 10 be demonstrating on the works computers, on ACM workstations, so that whatever I do, you can copy at the same time and follow what I do on your own workstation. However, once I've done that demonstration and you've got your own laptop, you can apply those techniques on your own setup. And another good thing about having your own is you can save those as templates and things like that, and save those sessions on your own computer. But I will always say, if you've got your own laptop, bring it in and use your own laptop instead. But the computers are there for you to use if you don't have your own laptop. So it's not a necessity, it's just a luxury if you can. The Chrism 19070, big name. Best sample library apart from Splice. Loop Masters, Loop Cloud, I think is the best one. I used Splice for about a month. Granted, I did it at the start of Splice and it was a bit, I don't know, it wasn't enough in there. Nowadays, Splice is huge and loads of people use it. But Loop Masters, the sample library company, have brought out their own app called Loop Cloud, where you can go in and find individual samples and loops and stuff from individual packs and just drag and drop them within your session. You not only do that, you can manipulate the sample within the Loop Cloud app. So say, for instance, you've got a loop in there that's really good, but it's in C major and you're in D minor. You can change it within the Loop Cloud to D minor, change the speed of it, and drag and drop it straight into your session. I use Loop Cloud a lot. I think it's a very good, like a catalyst for creativity. If you want to get something started quick, Loop Cloud is very good. And it's completely free. The samples in it aren't free. You have to buy the samples from it, but it's a free app. And you get 500 points when you sign up for it for free. And each sample's like 25 points or something like that. Which, again, in some lessons, I do like 500 points test or something where you do like, you've got 25 points and you've got to pick a sample from that to then make a whole track out of, for instance. So yeah, look at Loop Cloud, very good. George Hart, so bad thing about my Mac is that the storage is only 120 gigabyte, so it runs out quickly. That is understandable. Look at things like online storage, so Dropbox and stuff. A good thing to do, and again, I don't know how legit it is, but have loads of different email addresses. Have loads of different email addresses, and just open up the free. I used to do this all the time. Open up like free month like storage amount, and then once you get to like the day before, open a new one and just drag all the files over to it. That helps a lot. It is quite cheap nowadays. Dropbox I think you can get for about £8 a month, and it's like unlimited storage on Dropbox. If you've got a 2011, I think it was 2012 maybe that it stopped, you can open up and put in hard drives. I don't know if you can see on the back here, if you can't see, if you can, sweet. If you can't, there's like a hard drive on the back here, which was in my old laptop, which I've just stuck to the back of this one. Can you see? Shall I lift it up? See that? There's a little one there. And it just, look, just goes in the side. And that is a SSD, external SSD, that I've just stuck to the back with Velcro. Looks a bit not great, but it's an extra terabytes worth of storage that you can have stuck to the back. And because it's stuck, I never forget it. I sometimes forget the cable, because why not? But most of the time, I remember the cable in the bag, and you've always got an extra terabyte stuck to the back. Josh, favourite hardware sound processors? This really depends on what for. I mean, hardware sound processors. If I'm thinking about an EQ, I'm lucky enough to have been able to touch and use high-end pieces of gear, especially for like mastering. I would say the best EQ that I've ever touched is probably a Sontec EQ, very nice sounding, or a Vice Digital EQ. Hardware processors in terms of compressors, the SSL G-series compressor. When I studied here for my dissertation for the degree, I made a clone version of an SSL compressor, like hardware unit, which I still use pretty much every day. And I put like a valve stage in it. Anything with valves in it is pretty good. Synthesizers, I'm a big fan of hardware synths, not just because I think they sound better than software synths, because a lot of the time nowadays software synths are amazing. Omnisphere, Spire, Serum, massive. But a hardware synth, there's so much more creativity in it, and the turning of mistakes and stuff is huge. So for sound creation purposes, a hardware synthesizer. For EQs, a Sontec was amazing, or a Maschine, again, amazing. If you don't know what I'm talking about, look them up. They are very expensive EQs. And for compressors, SSL, G-series bus compressor, or an 1176 by Universal Audio as a mono compressor, just to smash things, really, and make them sound smashed. More questions? Do you sidechain the kick and snare in D&B? No, I don't. I used to a lot. Instead of sidechaining now, I just use a lot more equalization. So I will EQ frequencies out of one that I don't want to get in the way of the other. The things that I would sidechain, the only times I really use sidechain now is for the effect of sidechaining. Before I used to use it to clear things out the way, so like the bass would get away from the kick, but nowadays it's more, I would EQ the kick away from the bass and only use sidechain if I wanted that pump feeling. So no, it's not something that I do a lot at the minute. I do sometimes sidechain the hi-hats away from the kick and the snare, just to get a bit more vibe and sort of groove, swing to the hats, and the attack and release time on the compressor determines how swung those hats bounce around. But that's normally in sort of house music. I generally don't do that in drum and bass. But now reading that, I'm probably going to go home and do that. So cheers. Another one from Chris. Can I upload songs for free to streaming sites, though through AudioTube as an ACM student? Oh yeah, so if you're an ACM student, you get a free AudioTube account where you can just upload your music for free. And it will go to Spotify, Deezer, Apple Music, and all of them really, or any streaming site it will go to. And yeah, if you're an ACM student and you come here and you choose to come here, you get a free AudioTube subscription. Sam, hi again. All right. Another question, do you make a lot of your own instruments for drum and bass? And are samples a big part of creating music for you? I do use a lot of my own instruments. A lot of the time I have a synthesizer called a Dave Smith Pro 2, which I make a lot of noise on. And I just have days where I just have sound design days where I make noises and patches and then use those later on. A lot of the time, the samples that I would use would be samples like drum samples or percussive. When it comes to the instrumental things, it would be either piano multi-sampled instruments or basses that I had made myself from scratch with things like raw oscillator waves, square waves and saw waves and things like that. But are samples a big part of creating music for you? I would say yes, for ideas for things. Sometimes I'll start a track with all samples, and sometimes all literally like a loop that I'll take from Loop Cloud or something and drag it in, manipulate it slightly, but then use that as the bed for what I would make around it. And then once I've made around it, I would get rid of the original sample and add something else in. So samples can be very useful to use, and then not end up in the track a lot of the time. George, what's up? How can I make a melody rhythm for a drum and bass song? I mean, that's quite a vague question, but I mean, how to make a melody, a good way to start, instead of starting with the melody, is start with a drum pattern and a bass line, and then you can work your bass line round the melody. It's easier to make a bass line than a top line melody because there's normally less notes in the bass line than there is in a top line melody and rhythm and stuff. For rhythms, a good way to do it is just study drum and bass, man. Like, listen to a load of drum and bass tracks, listen to the style of music that you want to create, and listen to all the other subgenres, and listen to what's in the subgenres and see what you can apply to the style you want to make, if that makes sense. But study other people's sounds and study what works in terms of rhythm, what you like, not necessarily what you think you should be making to please everyone else. It's what you like, because it's very easy to come across as that guy that just makes what everyone else is making at the time. The crest of a wave person. If you like something, make it, really. So yeah, study other people's, see what they're coming out with, see what you think works for you or what could work for you, and then pick a different sound. Start with their idea, so sort of copy what they're doing in a way, but then work on from it. So just use it as a basis to start from, really. What else we got? Will Saunders. How important is making sure all the samples you use are in the right key? For time, for efficiency, speed, and like workflow, it's a very good idea to put things in key. Use software like Mixed in Key, where you can drag a whole load of samples in and just press like process or analyze, and it will put them all into key for you and give you like a Camelot wheel number, like 9A or something like that for whatever that key is. And my music theory is non-existent. There's no music theory when it comes to my music production. It's all kind of trial and error and what sounds good and where I place my fingers on a keyboard. So putting things in key does help. However, nowadays, any DAW, whatever sample, you can change the pitch of to put it in key with your track. It may not work, it may work. Very recently, I just made a drum and bass tune the other day, just an idea. Went onto YouTube and ripped a Brandy, the girl Brandy, the singer. She had a YouTube video where she was singing into her phone like a Snapchat story. I thought that sounds all right. Took it, dragged it in, and it was in key somehow, and it worked really well. I then just used that as an idea for the top line melody, and then sacked the recording off. Where are we? Another question: do you make a lot of your own? Oh, we just did that one. Cool. So yes, I make my own instruments. Melodies wise, nick other people's. How important the samples in the right key? It's as important as you want it to be, really. Kind of restrictive. If you see in the sample C major and you're in D minor, don't automatically go, oh no, I can't use it. Like, listen to it and then pitch it down so it's in that key. If it's just a single note, like a monophonic thing in that key, you just be able to re-pitch it down, up or down semitones, and it will work. So just try it. And then it won't be the same as the original sample, so win-win. Analyze, spelt differently. What a name. Normally, I don't like electronic music because I feel like it sounds way too computerized with actual instruments. Can you make it sound like there are actual instruments involved? Of course, by using actual instruments. I mean, I make electronic music. I don't play an instrument. I don't play guitar or piano or whatever. Like, I don't blow in things. I don't do that. I just use a keyboard pretty much. But it's sampled instruments that I would use, maybe pianos, sampled guitars. You can still make things sound organic. Drum and bass, you hear real sounds in a lot of the time. Even dubstep, you'll hear like guitars. It's what you do with the sounds afterwards. Hopefully, it's not something that should be too hard nowadays. I mean, there's loads of free sample libraries out there, free contact instruments with multi-sampled sounds. A lot of the time, though, you'll find you'll start with the sound of maybe a guitar, and then you'll process it all the way through till it sounds nothing like a guitar, which then I can understand you may think it sounds a bit computerized. But it's up to you really what you do with it. But you can make things sound like actual instruments. For instance, sound design. I do classes here where I teach you how to make a piano sound using oscillator waves. Make like an organ, like that classic house organ sound, just with waves of an oscillator. So it's easily done. But yeah, sign up, come here and I'll teach you how to do it. Sammy Reed. Is there a standard basic process you go through for using audio you've recorded on your phone to create samples? A standard basic process for using audio you've recorded. I take it off my phone, I email it to myself. I just use voice memos basically on my iPhone. Once I've recorded it as horrible as possible, I will email it to myself. I would then, as crude as you can, drag and drop it from my downloads folder into the session and listen to what it sounds like where I've placed it, and then just chop it about. I try to be as vague as possible. If you come at a sample that's random in a organised way, it's very easy to just disregard that sample straight away. If you come at it as vague as you've recorded it, you're going to end up having a lot more ideas around it. What I like to do is not listen to what's in it, but listen to what's around it. So like the other day I was walking from, I went to Nando's for lunch and I recorded my walk to Nando's, and I could hear when I was holding my phone down, because I didn't want to look like a weirdo walking around with my phone in front of me, I could hear the chain, like the zip of my pocket clicking and clanking, and I ended up using that for hi-hats in the track. So I'm not listening to like people's words, I'm listening to just other things, byproducts. People talking, reverse stuff, that's a good tip. If you've got a recording, straight away put it in reverse and listen to it backwards, and it automatically makes things sound eerie and like a really good atmospheric bed for something. And reverb, put reverb around it, because reverb's life. So Sammy Reed, got you. Matter Z. How do I make the basses that I create not sound so empty? Saturation, third order harmonics, thickness, compression. There's loads of different things. The right sound source, for one. A lot of the time it's down to layering. So if you've got a bass line, again, we do lessons on this here. If I've got a bass line, I'll split my bass into at least 2 parts, normally 3 parts, where I have a high section, mid section and a low section. Low would be frequencies from 60 below. Mid section would be from 60 up to about 100. And then the higher one would be 100 to whatever up at the top. And in those I would EQ those, cut them off separately, and then add different amounts of saturation to each of those. A good thing about that as well is that once you're cutting off those areas within your bass, other things will slip in there. So kick drums, snare drums, other percussive elements, other synths will then sort of have their own space in the mix a bit better, which will then in turn make your bass sound like it's thicker, make your bass sound more dominant and not like flabby bass, because no one likes flabby bass. So yeah, how to make the basses I create not sound empty, saturate them, look at third order harmonics, look at harmonic distortion, the overdrive plugin if you're in Logic. Excellent. If you're an Ableton user, open the auto filter, another tip, open the auto filter, completely open it so it's full frequency range. Go to the drive circuit at the bottom where you can pick the type of filter it is, and pick like O2R or MS2, and you get a little drive knob, same sort of thing. It just gives a bit of distortion to the sound, and that will help your basses poke through. Josh Drift, have you ever attempted to turn your music into a live set? I watched Romer do a live set the other day and it was amazing. I have done. I failed miserably a couple of times. It's something that I prep is the big thing for that. It's the answer to your question is yes, I've tried it. I failed. I've got better at it. The first time I did it, I failed miserably. I've got better at it, but it was really down to the preparation of your track. So you make the full track, and then I would use Maschine to do that, and I would put a whole section of the track on a pad and then make sure that that whole session is quantized. So whenever I press something, it plays in time. People like Arius, I think they're called, a guy and a girl from America or Canada, I forgot either one. They do some very good live sets on Maschine where they basically make a track and they just split it out into 16 sounds in the group. It's something that I would like to get more into, to be fair. I do DJ using a Maschine. So I perform my own tracks with that, where I take stems and perform those, stems of my own tracks and perform those over other tracks. But in terms of performing a track or doing a live set, it's something I'd like to get into, but it's not something that I do. I could show you how to do it, but then it's up to you afterwards to then go on and make it your own. Chris again. What would you say is the best method of promoting your music when you start with no following? Annoy people is the best thing I can give you. Be on people the whole time. Constant uploads and frequent uploads. A good YouTube channel. When I say a good YouTube channel, I mean a YouTube channel that has good content. Nowadays, everyone, like IGTV on Instagram, have something that's consistency. So if you're wanting to promote just your music, have another angle to it. So maybe it's you going out or you in the studio making the tune, rather than just posting the tune up, have a video of you making the tune, or like a little swirly thing going on with the video. But it's consistency, really. You could have 1 week you put 3 videos out and then you put nothing out for 4 weeks. People are going to get bored with it and not look at the one you put out 4 weeks later. So it's consistency, really. So the best method, I'd say you go to DistroKid and upload, or have about 8 tracks or so, and then filter your, or stagger, should I say, your distribution. So 1 month you put 2 tracks out as an EP, next month another 2 tracks, and then you're always sort of 4 months in hand with what you're doing. So the consistency is a bit easier and a bit more manageable. Josh Overman, how do you stay dedicated to a track and not keep creating new ones? I don't. I always say this to every student: you never finish a track. Tracks are never finished; they're just abandoned. You just want it off you, like you just want it off your life. Like, just get away from me with music a lot of the time. The only way I would really finish it is if I've got a definite deadline for it. I like to make a lot of ideas and then come back to those ideas. So it's not a bad thing that you never finish a track. It's something that you, if it's a necessity that you're making an EP, or you've got a deadline or a commission, or you're doing something for someone else, then you kind of have to finish it. But staying dedicated to it is, if you've got a deadline, is to set yourself like a planner. So if you've got 2 days to do it, day 1, first half of the day, idea. If your idea is not sorted by the end of that day, you move on to a new idea. If it is, you move on to mixing, and then you get the idea sent back over to that person. So it's like planning what you're doing, having a schedule for it. Kind of a creativity killer when you start to schedule things, but if you've got a deadline, like I say, you've got no choice really. Sam Eade, what tempo do you usually use for D&B? 174 I always go for, even though the one I'm working on just before today is 170. The only reason for that is because the vocal that I pitched and like time stretched was a little bit too chipmunk, a little bit too fast at 174. But normally 174 is kind of the happy medium. 170 if I'm more on that chilled vibe. I hate the word vibe. The more chilled area of drum and bass, but 174, the happy area, pretty much. Little tracks again. Any advice with naming a track? Yes. I always get stuck with trying to come up with names. I've got a 5-year-old son. He's going to be 6 on Saturday. I've got a 5-year-old son, and I just say, Taylor, shout me a word, and he'll give me a word, and then I'll use that word as the idea. Don't go out and have kids just to do that, obviously. But like, if you've got just talk to someone in the room and go, give me a word, and then they'll be like, oh, I don't know, and then they give you a word. If you like it, use it. A lot of the time as well, I'll go to the mood that I'm looking at for this sort of track. Like, I'd have moody or like miserable, and then I'll type in Google miserable thesaurus, and it'll give me a load of different words that go with that, and then I'll just pick a word from that and do like a play on it. Other ways of naming tracks, very random. You can easily get into the final bit 4-1 FML, that kind of thing, like words, like sentences this long for file names. Try and keep it as simple as you can, down to 1 word. It's easier to remember 1 word than it is 4. So, yeah, ask someone around you, and that's pretty much it. I think we're going to stop there for the questions. Throat's killing me. Thank you very much all for your questions there. If you've got any questions at all after this, please feel free to email me. My email address is sstedford, so SSTEDFORD @acm.ac.uk. And I will answer any of your questions, obviously. Give me a couple of minutes, because I may be driving or like making music, but just ask me anything, whether it's to do with today's workshop, whether it's to do with sound, whether it's to do with ACM courses, whether you just want to geek out about audio. I'm more than happy to talk to you. One last thing, we do have open days here all the time. If you're interested in coming to ACM to learn music production, whether it's contemporary music production, electronic music production, recording, mixing, anything, not just making drum and bass tunes and making electronic music. If you're interested in anything music production, just come down to one of our open days. I will be here. You can sign up for these open days at the ACM website, which is www.acm.ac.uk. And yeah, just sign up for them there. We are in clearing at the moment. So if you want to level up, call our admissions team and they will give you all the information that you need and they'll guide you sort of through that process. It's a very easy process. It's not a big process or anything. Anyone can do this. If you've got a slight interest in music and you're thinking, maybe I want to go down it, just try, just inquire. It's a nice, easy process and we're here to help you. That's kind of what we're here to do. So if you are interested, call the admissions team. The number is 01483 500 841. So 01483 500 841. Talk to admissions and then we can have a chat. I'm at most of the open days, if not all of the open days. So if you see me about, just stop me and say, hey, and we can geek out about stuff and I'll go through anything that you want to go through, as long as it's music related and not personal issues, because, yeah, music, innit? Make sure next week, I hope you enjoyed that today. I hope it was helpful to some people. Next week, same time, 12:30, Matt Russell, my colleague here, is going to be doing his live stream and he's going to be going through guitar, not just guitar. He's going to be going through how to tune your guitar, how to set up your guitar, professional ways of using a guitar, pretty much. So if you're interested in that, even if you're not interested in guitar, it's going to be a really good thing to get Matt's take and ask Matt any questions about the courses here at ACM or anything to do with music production. So thank you very much. My name's Shea Stedford, remember. Any questions? stedford@acm.ac.uk. And thank you for watching. I'm going to crack on with what I was doing before this, because I started making a tune before. A vocal from a ACM vocal student who was a production student, went on to vocals. So yeah, thank you very much. Bye.